If you're enjoying this Med Prep to Go Step 1 podcast, you can now get the content along with the content of the Crush Step 1 podcast ad-free in one bundle. Just go to medprep2go.com and find our new subscription podcast called Med Prep to Go Step 1 Bundle.
When the holidays start to feel a bit repetitive, reach for a Sprite Winter Spiced Cranberry and put your twist on tradition. A bold cranberry and winter spice flavor fusion, Sprite Winter Spiced Cranberry is a refreshing way to shake things up this sipping season. And only for a limited time. Sprite, obey your thirst.
When evaluating potential hires for your small business, it's essential you look beyond resumes. Sure, a candidate may appear impressive on paper, but understanding the person is crucial. LinkedIn, the world's largest professional network, provides a complete view of your candidate's skills, experiences, and interests. With LinkedIn's up-to-date data, you can be confident that you really know who you're hiring. Post your free job at linkedin.com/achieve. That's linkedin.com/achieve. Terms and conditions apply.
Every who down in Who Newville liked the holidays a ton. But where to get great prices on gifts, they had no idea. None. They searched and they searched for great gifts under $25. Gifts for spouses and friends and even their toddlers. When suddenly one who shouted, Walmart has what you want, knowing they have Lego, Tree Hut, and low prices to flaunt. So they enjoy the holiday season as Who's often do. Cheering and shouting, Walmart has incredible gifts. Who knew? Find gifts they'll love under $25 at Walmart.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Med Prep to Go podcast. I'm Dr. Raj, and what's my jam? Well, I love teaching. I've been teaching USMLE steps 1, 2, and 3 for quite some time. In fact, I teach for one of the most biggest popular board review courses ever, and I teach physiology. So today, I am overly pumped to be doing physio questions. So why do I have the Med Prep to Go podcast with my main guy, Dr. Ted O'Connell, is because of our mission is to improve medical student wellness and reduce educational debt by providing a high-quality USMLE question bank in an online and audio format. Also, by making medical education material available to study on the go. We strive to give you time back in your day to focus on your health and well-being. And if you want to learn more about me, check me out on my social media stuff. I'll mention it at the end of the podcast. And you always can read these questions along with me at the medprep2go.com website. So like I mentioned, today we're reading USMLE Step 1 physio questions, and we usually read 3 of them. So I am super excited. And if you listen to when I'm reading them, I love to babble and throw my 2 cents in there. I can't help it. So I hope you enjoy it. So first question is a 23-year-old man presents to the clinic with chest pain and dyspnea on exertion for the past several weeks. Past medical history is negative. He does not take any medications. He does not report similar symptoms. And doesn't have any pertinent family history. And I think what I wanted to say is he does not report that similar symptoms are common in other family members. That was kind of weird, huh? Okay. He denies smoking cigarettes or drinking alcohol. Vital signs are within normal limits. Physical exam, here it is, reveals a decrescendo murmur heard at the base of the heart during systole. Which of the following underlying conditions predisposes the patient to these symptoms? Is it having A, bicuspid aortic valve, B, Down syndrome, C, Edwards syndrome, D, Marfan syndrome, E, patent ductus arteriosus, a little PDA? So stop right there. Looking at the question itself, what is kind of funky monkey? It's a 23-year-old having chest pain and shortness of breath. Weird. So on step 2, that would jump out at me. You know what I mean? This is kind of young, so I'm thinking about things that may be a little more congenital, something a little bit earlier in nature. You say the word, chest pain, shortness of breath. I mean, my differential mainly is going to be heart and lung, because one of the main things is oxygen. The heart delivers the oxygen, the lungs bring it in. Of course, the hemoglobin carries it. So definitely I'm thinking about something with oxygen, maybe underlying causing these symptoms. No family history. Okay, so maybe something genetic may not be pertinent here. So, but the big thing is, understanding these valvular diseases that are out there, especially when the big buzzword here is, well, which valvular disease can give you a crescendo, decrescendo murmur during systole? The key thing is during systole. So, when I hear that, what heart valve lesion jumps to your mind? Yeah, you nailed it. It has to be some AS, aortic stenosis. Now, when I think about aortic stenosis, we're talking about in the air quote elderly people. I think about people who get calcified aortic valves. They can present with CHF, they can present with syncope, they can present with chest pain. And if we talk about crescendo, decrescendo, yeah, I remember that sometimes they'll talk about the peaking of the murmur. So if you have a late peaking crescendo, decrescendo murmur, that's a real severe, aortic valve stenosis. These are ones where like the aortic valve diameter can be less than 1 centimeter. These are really bad. So, but who would get aortic valve earlier in life? I guess a bicuspid aortic valve. In this question, they say 23. That's pretty young, even for getting symptoms for bicuspid aortic valve. But I'm sure it's possible. But I would say for most of my patients by bicuspid aortic valve, they tend to be a little bit older than that. Not like aortic stenosis from calcification's old, but 23 is pretty young. But let's look at the choice here. So I like bicuspid aortic valve. That definitely fits the murmur. Down syndrome, a lot of it could happen with the tricuspid valve. I know it's aka tricuspid atresia is associated with it. There are so many things associated with Down syndrome, but just by, the way this vignette is written, they're not even describing someone with Down syndrome. That's not really the classic thing I see with Down syndrome. So I wouldn't go for B as Down syndrome for trisomy 21. Edwards, wow, I haven't thought of Edwards syndrome since I took step 1. I believe that's trisomy 18. And it does have a lot of heart stuff involved with any of these syndromes, including Edwards, but I don't think it's aortic stenosis, so I'm not going to go with C. Marfan's, I'm digging Marfan's a little bit because I know that, stuff could happen with the aortic valve. There's aortic root dilatations. They could have things like aortic regurgitation. But I'm not feeling aortic stenosis here. So I'm not really thinking D as much. In PDA, that's not how you describe the murmur of patent ductus arteriosus, So I'm going to go without even looking at the answer choices. That was my verbal, how I think of things. I'm going to go with A as in bicuspid aortic valve. And the correct answer is, yeah, I got this one. All right. The patient is presenting with aortic valve stenosis. The bicuspid aortic valve is one of the most common congenital heart diseases and predisposes you to aortic stenosis and sometimes even regurgitation. There was a strong inhibitable component to bicuspid aortic valve, even though here it says that he does not report any similar symptoms in any of his family members, but hey, it's all right. It can occur sporadically or as an autosomal dominant inherited disorder with variable penetrance. Clinical presentation can range from asymptomatic oscillatory findings to symptoms such as dyspnea, decreased exercise tolerance, angina, or syncope. And why do people with aortic stenosis get anginas? Because the takeoff of the coronary arteries is right after the aortic valve. And if you have stenosis, decreased blood flow going to those coronary arteries, you can definitely present with some angina, like a demand ischemia. If you have syncope, wow, that aortic valve's got to be really stenosed. Decreased blood flow going to the CNS. Around 10% of cardiac output goes to the CNS. So that's pretty bad if you are having syncope. It may also present with bacterial endocarditis or ascending aortic aneurysm. All right. Choice B, Down syndrome is not correct. Downs does not increase the risk of aortic stenosis, but does increase the risk of having atrial septal defects. Patient would also present with other physical findings like a flat facies, predominant epicanthal folds, single palmar crease, just to list some of the classic things that we see with Down syndrome. Choice C, Edwards syndrome. I still say it's going to be trisomy 18, but I'm almost gonna look it up while I'm reading it for you guys, because I want to make sure that I'm giving you the right info and stuff. But when we talk about Edwards syndrome, it's not the right answer. It usually presents with ventricular septal defects. Ventricular septal defect murmurs present with more holosystolic. It's very harsh sounding. And when we talk about that, what is going to be another classic way we can do it is say that, hey, if we have that holosystolic harsh sounding murmur, it usually is in the tricuspid area. Patients with Edwards syndromes would not be expected to live past the age of 1 year old. And yes, it is trisomy 18. Whew, multitasking. Marfan syndrome, choice D, is incorrect. Marfan syndrome does not predispose patients to aortic stenosis, but does predispose them to mitral valve prolapse. And like I said, aortic valve disease, such as aortic regurgitation, can be very common also in Marfan syndrome, but not so much aortic stenosis, And remember, if we're talking about aortic regurgitation, and I described the murmur, it's diastolic in nature. It's kind of like a diastolic rumble. And if they're going to describe the pulse of someone who has aortic regurgitation, remember, what is that pulse going to be described as? It's a bounding and collapsible pulse. So I didn't get any of that stuff here. So it's not going to be, Marfan's or aortic regurgitation. Answer choice E, patent ductus arteriosus, is also incorrect. PDA presents with a continuous machinery-like murmur, and it's usually due to congenital stuff like congenital rubella, or premature birth. So what's the learning point here? A bicuspid aortic valve is a common congenital heart disease that is inheritable and can be asymptomatic or present with symptoms of valvular dysfunction that are severe. It can lead to aortic stenosis or, in some cases, aortic regurgitation. Wow, I really went to town with that one. Let's do the next question. Okay, so we have a 57-year-old man that is transported to the emergency department by emergency medical services. The patient is unconscious and emergently intubated in the field. Patient has a past medical history of major depressive disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder. Patient reports he is an avid hobbyist and likes to rebuild engines on classic cars. Family history is unremarkable. Patient's wife found her husband down when she returned home from work. She states that he was working on a car with several gas-based heaters running. Now, this can't be good. Vital signs, patient's temperature is 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Blood pressure is 78/57. Pulse is tachy at 130. Respirations are 33. Patient is 5'11", weighs 201 pounds. An ABG is notable for a pH of 7.32, PCO2 of 33, PO2 of 380, a bicarb of 16, a carboxyhemoglobin level that's elevated at 22. And if they don't mention it, I'm just going to throw it out there. It's not in the vignette, but I'm going to say that the O2 saturation, the O2 sat, the pulse ox, let's go for it, is 98%. 98%. That's correct. All right. And the PaO2 is what? 380. That's super normal. What's going on here? Which of the following forms of gas exchange governs the most likely etiology of this patient's condition? So for those who don't know, I'm a pulmonary critical care, sleep medicine, and internal medicine boarded doc. Pulmonary is the jam. So based on this vignette, can you tell me what is the likely diagnosis? Oh, you nailed it. Carbon monoxide. So this is one way you can do it. So when we talk about carbon monoxide, a couple things. Remember that I think this is a good way to kind of review what are the forms of oxygen in the blood. So remember that there is oxygen that's bound to hemoglobin. And yes, carbon monoxide loves binding to hemoglobin. It does. It totally does. But, and it loves it, but when I said the pulse ox is going to be 98%, is remember, when we talk about pulse oximeter, it's only measuring one waveform of hemoglobin, which is the oxyhemoglobin. But if you want to measure carbon monoxide toxicity, you have to actually do a co-oximeter and get a carboxyhemoglobin level, which they did here. The carboxyhemoglobin level clearly is elevated. Carbon monoxide is clearly bound to hemoglobin, stealing one of those spots. But if you do a pulse ox, remember the pulse ox will be normal because the pulse ox only measures one wave of hemoglobin, which is oxyhemoglobin. That's why I want to give that pearl over there. And also, carbon monoxide does not affect the pAO2, the partial pressure for arterial oxygen. It just doesn't. That's why the PO2 is super elevated over here. And the question becomes, well, what is the most likely etiology of this patient's condition? We nailed it that it's carbon monoxide, but is it A, diffusion limited gas exchange, B, early capillary perfusion limited gas exchange, C, end capillary perfusion limited gas exchange, D, mixed diffusion limited and perfusion limited gas exchange, or E, normal gas exchange? And this one's a slam dunk. This is going to be answer choice A, diffusion limited gas exchange. And this is classic because this is one of the concepts you need to know for step 1, which is going to be Fick's law of diffusion. Not to be confused with the Fick equation. We use that to calculate cardiac output. But the Fick's law of diffusion can be applied anywhere in the body. We apply it when we talk about diffusion at the cellular level. We talk about it in the glomerulus. And we definitely like to talk about it in the lung. We talk about the alveolar interstitium capillary interface. And remember, when we talk about Fick's law of diffusion, that it has physiological properties and structural properties. These structural properties are thickness and surface area. The physiological properties are going to be solubility and pressure difference. So when we talk about carbon monoxide, which is the answer here, which we mentioned already, we also in clinical medicine use a procedure when I do a pulmonary function test called a DLCO, diffusion limited carbon monoxide. So this just basically means that carbon monoxide, what is its limiting factor is going to be things involved with diffusion, mainly surface area and things like thickness. Perfusion limited means what's really going to limit it, it's going to be the amount of blood flow going to that alveoli, which is not the main thing limiting when we talk about carbon monoxide. So choice A is 100% correct for the reasons that I just listed. Choice B, early capillary perfusion limited gas exchange, is wrong. Carbon monoxide does not readily dissolve into plasma, and the difference in the alveolar and early capillary partial pressures are maintained throughout the length of the capillary. Choice C, end capillary perfusion limited exchange, is incorrect. Carbon monoxide does not readily dissolve into the plasma, and the difference in alveolar and end capillary partial pressures are maintained throughout the capillary. Choice D, mixed diffusion limited and perfusion limited, is incorrect. Carbon monoxide's gas exchange is solely diffusion limited. In choice D, normal gas exchange, that's kind of weird. Normal gas exchange is basically meaning, is it perfusion limited? And as we stated, normally it's not perfusion limited, it is diffusion limited. So what is the key teaching point here is, there's so many, I could definitely just read this out, but I would say, number one, the key learning point is understanding clinically carbon monoxide toxicity. Number two is understanding the forms of oxygen in the blood. The most predominant form is always bound to hemoglobin. It's called the O2 sat. And like I said, in carbon monoxide toxicity, the pulse ox will be normal. But if you want to measure the carbon monoxide bound to hemoglobin, because we know that carbon monoxide has a really strong affinity to hemoglobin, you need to order a carboxyhemoglobin level. That comes in kind of like when you do an arterial blood gas. The other form of oxygen is the dissolved oxygen, the pAO2, and carbon monoxide does not affect that at all. The only things that affect the pAO2 are atmospheric pressure, FaO2, and hyper and hypoventilating. And I would say my last little pearl here, because is going to be, of course, understanding carbon monoxide is diffusion limited, which was the correct answer. And if I were to ask you, well, how do you die from carbon monoxide toxicity? It's going to be cardiac and CNS involvement. Individuals, because of demand ischemia, could develop arrhythmias in the heart, in the CNS, you can get seizures, mental status changes. Of course, in the extreme end, we treat it by putting them in hyperbaric oxygen chambers, which are not readily available. But of course, simple things first, we definitely want to give oxygen to these individuals. So yeah, I got a little carried away with this one. I hope you find all that super helpful. And like I said, if you go to medprep2go.com, you can actually read this question out. So we do have one more.
Oh, Hilton stay, your beds are soft and cozy. No lumpy couch, no stiff futon, no shower line at crack of dawn. Oh, Hilton stay, a holiday you're saving.
When you want holiday comfort you can count on, it matters where you stay. This season, enjoy spacious, comfortable rooms and friendly service when you book with Hilton instead. Hilton for the stay.
Here's my 30-second story with Guinness. As soon as my sister and I get home for the holidays, we don't even unpack. We head straight to our pub. The bartender already knows our order, Guinness and fries. We laugh all night, catch up with old friends, and walk home with faces sore from smiling. It's one of my favorite nights of the year. That was my 30-second story with Guinness.
Guinness Draft Stout. Please enjoy responsibly. Imported by Diageo Beer Company, USA, New York, New York.
Man, this is the longest podcast ever. 34-year-old man presents to his primary care physician with concerns of a feeling of heaviness in his legs. And he states that this feeling has been getting progressively worse over the past 3 weeks. He also states it seems as if his ankles are getting larger. The patient has not seen a physician in the last 10 years. He has a 12-year history of alcohol abuse, but he has been reducing his alcohol intake over the past year in an attempt to improve his overall health. Past medical history is otherwise negative. He does not take any other medications. Family history is not contributory. Vitals are within normal limits. Physical exam reveals a normal cardiac and pulmonary exam. On a abdominal exam, he has evidence of ascites with a fluid waveform. He has bilateral pitting edema. Oh boy, in the 34-year-old, this is bad. And there was no erythema associated with the pitting edema. Which of the following forces has the greatest impact on his edema? Is it A, albumin content in the capillaries, B, albumin content in the interstitial space, C, capillary permeability, D, lymphatic obstruction, E, mucopolysaccharides in the interstitial space? So which one would I cross out already? E, mucopolysaccharides in the interstitial space does not contribute to edema whatsoever. And when we talk about edema formation, whose concepts am I thinking about? Oh, you nailed it. Starling's forces. Starling's forces is really focusing on hydrostatic pressure and oncotic pressure. So, of course, if we're talking about edema in the third space, you're going to have a very high hydrostatic pressure in the capillaries. We see that with CHF. So those aren't any of the right choices there. Or it's going to deal with oncotic pressure. Oncotic pressure, think of proteins exhibiting the oncotic pressure. And these proteins are kind of like sponges. They suck fluid towards them. So if the proteins are in the capillaries in the vessel like they should be, then there should be no fluid in the interstitial space. But if you have a lack of oncotic pressure, such as in a cirrhotic or nephrotic, nephrotics because they're dumping proteins in the urine, cirrhotics because they're just not making proteins because the liver makes almost all the proteins. Then, of course, fluid's going to sequester out of the capillary and go into the interstitial space. So choice A, albumin content in the capillaries, seems to be the right answer here. I'm going for that. B, albumin content interstitial space. There really should be no proteins in the interstitial space to begin with, or very little, so it's not going to be B. Capillary permeability, I think more of like a sepsis type patient, a vasodilatory type shock. This is not that. D, lymphatic obstruction. Don't get me wrong, lymphatic obstruction will definitely give you lower extremity swelling. Does it really fit in this case? Does it really fit in someone who has bilateral, who has a history of alcohol use? Probably not. And even if you talk about most common, I would say a lack of oncotic pressure with a cirrhotic nephrotic probably is going to be more common than lymphatic obstruction that we see. So without even looking at the answer choices, I'm going A. Boom, correct choice right there. And just kind of looking at the answer choices, exactly what I said, which is it's all about Starling's forces. And if you're cirrhotic, you don't not making proteins, no protein content, and the most common protein being albumin in the capillaries. So you're not, keeping fluid in the capillaries, it's going to that third space itself. Choice B, albumin content in the interspaces is wrong. There's usually not much proteins in the interstitial space. Choice C, like I mentioned, capillary permeability. Think more of like the sepsis type patient here. That's not going to be what we see in this vignette. D, lymphatic obstruction, like I mentioned already, is not the right answer. Think of bilateral history of alcohol use, definitely decreased protein content would be the right answer, not lymphatic obstruction. And mucopolysaccharides in the interstitial space is wrong. It can occur sometimes. Myxedema results from mucopolysaccharides in the interstitial space. And we see that in the extreme ends of hypothyroidism. But once again, this is not a very common cause. So what is the key teaching point of this question? Please go over Starling's forces. There's an equation that you need to know for the board exams. It's in our Med Prep to Go questions, which you could read. And you don't want to miss this one. They definitely will give it doing some simple mathematics. And I love these 3 questions for physiology, and I hope you appreciated the extra I gave you for this question. I know we just read them off most of the time, but physio is my jam. And if you want to learn more about me, please check me out on my social media, whether it's Instagram or, I can't believe I said it, TikTok or LinkedIn. And check out my book series. It's Beyond Pearls. We have definitely books for step 2 and step 1. And hope you enjoyed this. And I'll see you again for the next questions on the Med Prep to Go podcast.
Hi, everyone. This is Ted O'Connell. I just want to let you know that we have launched a Step 2 QBank podcast, very similar to our Step 1 QBank podcast. Each episode will have 3 questions so that you can study on the go. We are actively recording these and plan to release a new episode every 2 weeks. We're also launching a premium podcast bundle that will include ad-free access to USMLE Step 2 Secrets podcast, as well as early and ad-free access to all of our episodes from the Step 2 QBank podcast. So please go over to our website at medprep2go.com and check these out, or you can access them wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks so much.